Let me take the first question. I think it's already too late for some American companies that haven't already started to do it. In the short run, if you have a supply chain of products, whatever you're making in China and sending it out, what you need to do is probably right now order extra amounts of inventory, maybe 2 or 3 months, and then get it out of China and put it somewhere in the Philippines or in Japan or Korea, somewhere else, so that if there is this war gets much hotter over the next few weeks or few months, that at least you can carry the supply chain. In the longer run, I work with a lot of companies who are no longer just manufacturing in China, which they did exclusively for a long time, but now they're trying to find other places in Asia where they can do the manufacturing, even if it's slightly more expensive.
But that takes a long time. That can take months, if not years, to effectuate.
It would take at least a year, in my opinion, to find a reliable supplier, Tyler, outside of China who could do your work. So that's something they should already be doing right now. But in the short run, it would make sense to order extra inventory that you can put offshore so that you can at least buy time. Kelly had someone on her earlier program, The Exchange, when they were talking about this. Generally, what I've learned, and I think all experts know, is that there's no silver bullet here. You simply have to deal with the situation as it arises. But are China and the U.S. headed toward a confrontation? I think the answer is yes.
So let's talk a little bit about this war of nerves, if nothing else. One difference between the United States and China, even I understand this, is China is not a democracy. President Xi does not have to face the polls, the electorate, in 2020. President Trump does. Does that suggest that if the pressure gets too high, that the president of the United States will be the one who seeks a deal before the president of China does?
That's a terrific question. Xi Jinping is the single most powerful political leader in the world because he doesn't have any bosses. He doesn't have to answer to Congress, doesn't have to answer to the judiciary. So what he can do is if he gets his back up, and the Chinese, by the way, are very emotional people. They're not the stoic Chinese that you read about, and they are very proud, they're very nationalistic. So if President Trump says, you must do this or else, the Chinese will sit back and wait, because the one thing President Trump, I think, needs to be reelected is a strong U.S. economy and stock market. And if they tank over the next 6 to 8 months, it's obviously going to adversely affect his election prospects. So if I were in the Trump administration, obviously he hasn't asked me my opinion, but if he did, I'd say, look, get the best deal you can that you think puts the United States in a better position now than it was 6 months ago, and say, fine, let's go forward.
So let's talk a little bit about something we were not dancing around. We addressed it directly at the top of the broadcast, and that is the idea that there are some who are presumably still advising the president who see the confrontation, the collision between China and the United States as far more than just about trade, that it is a kind of Cold War competition, collision of two systems, of two military powers, of two countries that have stakes regionally, if not globally. How do you see that? Is this more than just about trade?
Yes. In the long run, China will have a larger economy than the United States, I'd guess in about 4 years. But the Chinese have 4 times as many people. But the U.S. essentially was unchallenged economically for the last 30 or 40 years. Russia, as you know, has shrunk and continues to shrink. So the next big guy in the room is going to be China. And so anyone who thinks that this is just about tariffs or trade, I think, is fooling themselves. But that's an especially important reason why, when you get into a dispute, you want to make sure that you're not doing things that push people or things over the precipice. That's why I think the president, in threatening China to saying, you must do this or else, is making a mistake. Because the Chinese are very strong. They're not as strong as we are, but they're not kids anymore. They're not teenagers. They're grown-ups. And we have to deal with them in a sophisticated way.
And they are very resolute. I mean, they are very resolute. You made a very, I think, telling point earlier. They are a proud people who felt aggrieved over the domination of the West and other powers for centuries, really.
Well, Tyler, if you go into a Chinese school, you know, in America we learn the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. But in China they talk about the century of humiliation, which was between 1852 and 1949, when the West, essentially the U.S., France, Russia, essentially put pressure on the Chinese and took it over. At that time, the Chinese have been very embarrassed. And what Xi Jinping has done, to his credit, is he said to the Chinese people, we will not allow this to happen again.
Right.
They have what's called the Belt and Road Initiative, where they want to essentially build a Silk Road between China into Europe. What's the year they want to complete that? 2049, exactly 100 years after the Chinese Communist Party took over China. China's very proud, and you have to deal with them straight and honestly and not try to push them around too much.